Welcome, everybody, to our podcast recording of Shining Light on Shadows. This is our weekly podcast where we look at, investigate, explore some of the things that cause us to do what we do. Why do we do what we do? That was a question I came up with. I asked myself 20 years ago. And this podcast looks at the different things that impact on us, like our relationships, our emotions, our goals, how we look at goal setting, our archetypes. And there's a range of things that we just explore. We have a chat about them. And we also look at what's stopping us. Joe Dispenza says, you can't create a new future if you're being held by your past. You're being held by your past, and these are your shadows, the things that you deny, suppress. They're not consciously available to you, and we'll explore some of these in this weekly podcast. I hope you enjoy and keep coming back, and sign up for our Friday night podcast. Thanks a lot. Bye. Okay, right, we are going. Oh, this is complicated. Very complicated. So, welcome back after that delay where I wasn't speaking. I've had to start again. Welcome to Shining Light on Shadows with John and Maggie. Maggie's not here again tonight. I think she's having some challenges at the moment, but we're back again. Shining Light on Shadows with the Elite Mentorship Forum. We use the Elite Mentorship Forum, EMF, to develop that self-awareness. That it's a 6-month course, and it's a self-development course, but it's developing self-awareness. Now, reminds me of Joe Dispenza's line, you can't create a new future. You can't create goals, visions, if you're being held by your past. And this is the challenge a lot of us, most of us run into. We sort of build goals, visions, whatever, but we don't think we're good enough. Our self-worth is an issue. This is a shadow. It's not that we know the self-worth is there, but why? It's the why. It's if you like, an event, there's an event. Event happens, we're triggered, we behave. So we're triggered, the self-worth, and then we behave. It's the goal before the self-worth there. This is where the shadows start to come up. But here on this podcast and the Elite Mentorship Forum is primarily about self-development, self-awareness. And that first step, and it's probably half of self-development, is just developing the self-awareness that something's going on. And we can change a lot in that phase. We can change our behaviors. We can change the way that we process, the way that we think through things, the way that we view the world. But we weren't born with this stuff. Where did it come from? I'm just going to come out of that. Where did it come from? That's where the shadows come up. But we're looking at self-development. And today particularly, we're taking one of the modules that we looked at last week. We were discussing our archetypes. Last week we looked at the sovereign, the warrior, the lover, the magician. And while they're labels, and I'm always quite aware that labels are things that other people put onto us. It's like this collection of, so the archetype, so the sovereign archetype, it has a lot of characteristics. They list all the characteristics of a sovereign, and then we take that on. We take the label and all the characteristics on. That's who we need to be. Well, this is their labeling. Somebody told me many, many years ago, you don't go to the dictionary to learn a new word. The words that you remember, all of the words that you remember came from somewhere. Some interaction, some event happened that's caused you to have a sense for that word. Now, when I say shadows, that's going to have a certain sense for you. Now, I think that I'm communicating that word because I'm saying it and I have my idea of my characteristics of that word, and I'm expressing them to you, the listener, and you're hearing that and you're processing it in your own way, and then we miscommunicate. We're separated by a common language. We communicate a lot because we have to be able to communicate. But we make these massive assumptions that I understand what you're talking about. You understand what I'm talking about. I learned the word shadow from a very different place than you would have learned it from. Archetypes is a sense, there's a learning of what that word means, but it's a sense that I've developed from my experience. Now, I can either evolve and develop from my experience, pulling from different places, or I can go to Tony Robbins and I can take his definition of what an archetype is, his definition of what a sovereign is, and I can say that's my sovereign. It's his sovereign, so it's my sovereign. Well, that's just a load of shit. And I think, having said that, it's good to understand there are archetypes there. We all have archetypes. We all use them as masks. And these are unconscious. And this is why we look at this as a whole module, because we're running these archetypes. Carl Jung first looked at them and brought them up. And these are the archetypes we look at: the sovereign, the magician, the lover, the warrior. And there's more. There's more there's more archetypes in there, of course, than there's the feminine archetypes. And today we're going to be talking about the feminine archetypes. But yes, so be careful about taking on the label. So there's two things that we're looking at here. One is becoming aware of the archetypes we're running. Now, if you look at the list, the label that they've given, you'll ascribe those to who you are, to your characteristics, which is wrong because they're your characteristics. They're different to anybody else's. The other way of using it is to be proactive and say, I'm going to build my own archetypes. Who do I need to be to step into this situation? I was working with a client a little while ago about going into a new job. Who do I need to be to step into that new job? Okay, that's a classic situation to evolve a character, an archetype. So that could be John's work archetype. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. So this is the proactiveness of it. So who do I need to be? Now, you don't want to go in as the sovereign, because that's probably going to get everyone's backs up. They might see you as egotistical because they don't know you. So you've got to sort of play, wait, is that the best person? Is that the best situation to go in as? If you're going and directing 1,000 people, or a mid-sized company, a large company, then that's probably the person you want to go in as. How often do we go in and because our ego is up, because we're worried, where there's fear there's uncertainty, especially there's worry about what's going to happen. Do we go in with a bit of a shadow warrior or something going on? So being proactive, who do I need to be in this situation, is really what archetype do I need to create to go into that situation? As a mum, as a dad, who do I need to be for my children? It's the archetype. Very different archetype, hopefully, from the one that you have at work. We've already done the module there on authenticity. Are these archetypes being authentic? Wow, that's another step. Maybe we do another module completely on that one. At the moment, we're just looking at gaining an understanding of the labels of the way that the way that we're understanding. Let me just move that across there. The way that we're understanding our archetypes. And I'm going to take on some of the labels and the characteristics here so that we can express them. So last week we talked about the archetypes. Now there's no gender in the archetypes, but because Carl Jung wrote them, they tend to sound masculine. They're not meant to sound masculine. But what I'm going to do today is we're going to explore the archetypes in their feminine nature. This is interesting because we all have a masculine, feminine side. There's no gender bias there or physiology about it. We both have a masculine and a feminine part. As men, we tend to go towards the masculine more than the women, than the feminine, and I'm generalizing there. And likewise, but some women, to work in a testosterone-driven business, motor racing, they may have to step into their masculine and build their masculine up. So they're masculine more now than they're feminine. So let's look at the archetypes in their feminine side. So the first archetype I want to look at is the sovereign, the queen. Now, the queen archetype, the sovereign archetype, is the person that's in their power. They're the one that walk into the room and take command without saying anything. They don't need to impose themselves. They don't need to do any neat things. They just are. I was at a talk a while ago, and I can't remember who it was. Brilliant speaker. I know, but I've seen lots of different speakers. Dr. DiMartini is a fantastic speaker. Kane Minkus, I was watching yesterday. Incredible, incredible speaker. Really, always thinking on the spot and not thinking about what he's going to talk about. And I can see, and this is what I practice. It's not thinking what I'm going to talk about. It's thinking about how he's coming across, how he's moving. It's all this other stuff going on. The content, the information he's imparting is almost the second part of what's actually going on. That speaker came onto the stage, and I remember this, that they just stood there. A teacher in a classroom is stepping into their sovereign, into their queen. When they step in front of the class, they don't need to say anything. They don't need to shout, bang their rule or their cane on the desk or whatever. They just are. This is the sovereign, the queen archetype. They're in control. They're comfortable in their own skin. That's the only way you can be in control. You can't have your ego, your emotions all over the place, even sort of, slightly not comfortable there, because then you're not in your power. And it's not these are not verbal things. This is the energy that you bring in. So a queen archetype is somebody that's holding the space. We talked about holding the space a couple of weeks ago. Fascinating. And my subjective personal opinion on holding the space is somebody is a coach. So and it can be anybody. I mean, when you're talking to a friend that's depressed, being able to hold the space is critical, is key to that relationship in that moment. Holding the space is just energetically being with them. It's not saying anything. I talk to coaches now and then, and I sort of say, how long did you leave between questions? Well, on the retreats that we run, the average is about 30 minutes. But for that 30 minutes, I'm not going making a cup of coffee. I'm holding the space. Interestingly enough, we do go and have coffee. You can't go for hours just working. So you do have breaks. But because we've moved, this is the level of training we're at. Because you've moved physical space doesn't mean that the session is judged. So you have to be very careful as a facilitator, as a coach, as a trainer, about what you're imparting in that moment. So this holding the space, whatever's going on. You're sitting with somebody who just wants to be quiet. They get comfortable with the silence. Now, can you imagine as a coach, as a trainer, being comfortable with the silence? You see, our ego jumps in. It wants to say anything because it wants to say something because the silence it's deafening. But that's not the sovereign, the queen archetype in their power. That's maybe the magician trying to jump in. But it's whatever's going on, not holding the space. Holding the space is a real skill that I've seen few people really be able to do, to hold the space. Because you don't want to be uncomfortable. So as the coach, you don't want to be uncomfortable. You don't want the client to be uncomfortable with that relationship. You don't want or the person you're talking to be uncomfortable. So you have to know when to move the situation on, when their system wants to be prompted with another question. And that could be a couple of hours. So what else does the queen know? The queen, this holding the space, commanding just by presence is real leadership. This is the embodiment of leadership. It's the person that creates the vision. It's the person that is creating empowerment just by being. It's something that is very closely, I think, remembering a lot of this labeling is personal, subjective, and personal opinion. A lot of this holding the space is from experience, and so from age. It's much more difficult. Just because you're older doesn't mean that you're going to have the experience. There's lots of 50-year-olds running around with adolescent brains. So age doesn't bring experience, but likewise, when you're young, you don't have the experience necessarily. So experience, being able to hold the space, being the embodiment of leadership. So somebody a coach that's with this Queen archetype, the sovereign, is somebody that's going to be holding the space for your client. It's going to be somebody who inspires them to reach their full potential. It's not going to be somebody that pushes, pulls, cajoles, holds accountable. Sovereign is somebody that just inspires. It doesn't mean that you inspire by actions. It can be all sorts of different things, but it's somebody that's it's somebody that inspires by their presence. So that's one that's very close to the king archetype, the queen archetype, the embodiment and presence that they bring to a situation. People unconsciously, a lot of this stuff is unconscious. People unconsciously refer to them. So the next archetype, the mother archetype. Shift gears a little bit. And this is the nurturing force, the mother archetype. This is the embodiment, if you like, of the care, the compassion, that empathy, that person that brings that sense of warmth. It's the ability to create a safe space where one can grow, where the client can grow. If you're coaching, the client can grow. If you're training, so that the people that you're training can actually start to learn and evolve. They feel comfortable in that space. So the mother archetype, empathy, unconditional support. Their presence encourages growth and learning, development, evolution. They're the person that has the warm embrace, the mother archetype. So if you're thinking about a coach, you think about somebody that helps, that celebrates the victories of their clients. They offer the support that helps the client to blossom, to grow. I didn't want to really talk about the shadows, but I suppose we have to acknowledge that these archetypes I'm talking about are in their fullness. And they're really hard points to reach, sitting at that archetype in its fullness. And invariably, we're not in the fullness. And I talked a little bit about this last week. I'll talk more about it next week when I talk about shadows, our immature archetypes. So we'll leave it. We'll leave it there. We'll go on to the next one. The wise woman, the archetype of the wise woman. What do they say? The wise woman, the whisperer, the oracle. So the wise woman, this is the person that is knowing, the holder of wisdom, creative, intuitive, and they can see beyond the surface. They can see more within you than you can see within yourself. It's a great line. So the wise woman, they're the ones that they're the whisperer. They're the ones that keep the ones that keep the secrets. They're a person that offers a offers a spiritual connection. There's something deeper going on for them. There's something ethereal, if you like. They're holding secrets. They're secrets they'll impart to you, but there's that unknowing learning that's going on. So we're talking particularly about coaching. So it's that coach that is a coach, that ability to connect on a deeper level with a client, that unspoken connection. That's the wise woman coming out, that intuition. So you'll have those intuitive insights into the client. Really good at guiding us through uncertainty. A wise woman is somebody that, the wise archetype, somebody that is listening intuitively, is guiding you because they're asking the right questions. They're showing you the way, if you like. And the last archetype I want to talk about is the lover. Very much similar to the masculine form, the lover, feminine lover. So last but not least, they're the one that embody connection. I was talking to sports team the other week, and they need lovers in a sports team, masculine or male or female sports teams, because it's about connection. The lovers is the one that connects the group. The lover is the archetype, the characteristics that you bring up as a coach to connect with your client, to make them feel more comfortable. It's that connection, that relationship that allows them to start to feel safe so that we can then bring out these other archetypes. So the lover is somebody that has the emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is one of our important intelligence. Then we have multiple intelligences, obviously IQ, which is the intellectual intelligence, but that's just one of many. Unfortunately, that's the way that we measure. Emotional intelligence is becoming sort of much more predominant. Nowhere near it's we still in our Western conscious thinking look to intelligence. We don't so much look to emotional or spiritual intelligence. Now, the love is the one that's connecting in here to the emotions. The wise woman archetype is somebody that's going to be connecting to the spiritual intelligence. They're going to have evolved and developed that characteristic more. So emotional intelligence. They're going to be able to foster the space to be able to share vulnerabilities, to be able to bring out those senses, those feelings, to allow whatever you're holding close, whatever the client's holding close, for them to bring it up so they can share their vulnerabilities. It's the lover archetype is the one that can hold the space for them to share. They're the ones that celebrate the beauty of human connection. And it's really important, emotions, because in each of these archetypes have their important points, have their strengths and their weaknesses. We'll talk about the weaknesses later. We're talking about the strengths right now. The lover is the one that brings up the emotions, and the emotions are important because everything starts with emotions. An event happens, we're triggered. Why are we triggered? Because that event pushes one of our emotions. Now, it's not a conscious thing yet. We're talking about this little gold dust before the behavior comes out. We go, why did I do that? It's the emotion that comes up. It's the emotion that gets the chemical running, that starts to fire off the still unconscious reactions, the physical behavior that's going on. So emotional intelligence, being able to recognize it, sense it, is really important in the lover. So really, what it comes down to here is what sort of coach, what sort of person, what sort of coach, what sort of trainer do you want to be? The whole point of this podcast is this is not necessarily, and I do coach people, I do coach athletes, but I'm more interested in coaching people that have done some of their personal development. You know, you've done some of the stuff, you've got into the coaching, and that's when the harder stuff starts to come up. You're in that session with the client, and they trigger you, and you get pulled down the rabbit hole with them. You've got your model, you know what you're doing, it's all conscious, and you've got your sense going on, and that something happens. They either do something or say something, and that triggers you. And an awful lot of coaches are like this, and this is what creates the burnout, the stress of being a coach. There's all the other stress, the physical stress of finding clients. That's one thing, but what I'm talking about here is actually holding the space for the client so that they can work through whatever it is that they're working through, whatever it is that emerges, that comes up. It this the a coach that is looking at what they're doing is going to notice what's going on. What do they have to do to stop it? Because if you're triggered by the client, if you're a life coach and you've had these experiences, and the client has a similar experience, their boyfriend upset them, their girlfriend upset them, and you've had it happen to you, and you remember back to the event, the context of that event that happened for you, and that triggers you, and you go off your unconscious biases come in. You run off your model. It's harder to hold the space because you're internalizing what's going on. You're not externalizing it. Putting your stuff to one side, your ego, your masks, your mirrors, putting that stuff to one side, all your stuff, and being able to interact with the client, holding the space for the client. So this is really what we're looking at here with the archetypes. The archetypes here talking about today is recognizing what they are when they come up for me. Really important to be able to know where I'm going. Okay, that's the first part of Joe Dispenza's line, creating a new future. So as a coach, who do I need to be a good coach, to be an effective coach, to get to do what I need to do? Makes me think of integral theory, where we have a worldview, how we see ourselves in the world. But it's more than how we see ourselves in the world. It's how we perceive others see us in the world. So there's two ways going there. And when all that stuff's going on, are you being authentic? Or are you getting wobbled? Are you getting triggered? Are you starting to unconsciously, a lot of the stuff's going on. Now you've done a bit of PD, personal development, and you're starting to become aware of the fact that, oh, okay, that's an emotional feeling. But yeah, that's great. You've recognized it, but what are you going to do about it? Personal development looking forward doesn't do anything with that. Yeah, you've noticed it. Great. So last week, we're just looking at where we're going with these archetypes, noticing when I personify the queen archetype, the sovereign archetype, when I personify the wise woman or the lover archetype. Almost out of time. So the wise woman, the mother, because there are times in a coaching situation in life, obviously mothers, but in a coaching situation where holding that safe space where the client, the person is ready for the growth. It's really important. I'm going to wrap it up now because I want to cut this a bit short because I think I talked for too long. So I'm going to wrap this up now. So next week, we're going to talk a bit more about the shadows of archetypes. So remember last week I talked about the archetypes. Let's call it the masculine form. Today, I've just introduced the feminine form of the archetypes. Now, those archetypes may have different labels, the queen, the wise woman, the mother archetypes, but really, they're not that much different to the masculine ones. Now, there's lots of different archetypes of spiritual archetypes. I don't want to go into there. We get off the point. So it's just those four archetypes we've looked at today. I hope you enjoyed this. You got anything out of it? Drop me a note in the messaging. This is all over Facebook. And also it will be on YouTube. And I will actually be running these live on YouTube very shortly. So I hope you've enjoyed this. And this is me, and I'm out. Thanks very much. We'll see you next Friday night on Shining Light on Shadows with
Well,
David.
that's it. I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to see some of the other videos, you can go to our YouTube channel, which is on the link next door, just here, the QR code. And hopefully, we will see you next week. Thank you. Bye.